following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Telly Olson. We are back talking vintage sports in the zone. I'm Ralph Tycho of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We've got the four mavens. We've got Alan Blumkin. How are you, sir?
Hello there, everybody.
David Hubler is here.
Hi, good evening.
Hal Bock is here.
Hi, everyone.
Good. And to get it all started, I'm going to introduce George Case, who is going to talk about, introduce David Hubler, and you two are going to talk about the Nats and the Grays. And then later on in the podcast, we're going to talk with Hal Bock about his book. And I look for a terrific show. So have at it, guys. George, open her up.
Okay, Ralph, thank you very much. Ralph had wanted me to talk to David a little bit, and I'm really happy to do it. David Hubler wrote The Nats and the Grays about World War II era Major League Baseball in Washington. And, I was pleased to be able to provide David with some information, but I thought the timing was really, really great because back then in the World War II era, Washington, the closest they came to winning anything was in 1945. 43, they came in second, but it was 13 and a half games behind the Yankees. 45, they lost the American League pennant on the last day of the 45 season. And now you have the world champion Washington Nationals, and the Senators back when my dad played, their nickname was both the Senators and the Nationals. So, David, if you would, talk a little bit about your book and your experiences writing it, and also about this past baseball season in Washington had to be very, very exciting.
Yes, and next year could even be more exciting. The Nats have bolstered their bullpen, which was one of the worst in Major League Baseball. I don't think any other World Series champion team has managed to win the World Series with such a poor bullpen. So they just picked up a couple of pretty good relief pitches yesterday or today. But yeah, so excitement is really building again in town here, and spring training is only about 60 days away. So we shall see what happens. As far as the Nats and the Grays go, I have to credit the late, great Al Gianfrido for the inspiration for the book. As most baseball fans know, Gianfrido made that tremendous catch off DiMaggio in the 47 World Series, and it was the only time that DiMaggio ever showed any emotion on the field. He kicked the dirt as he rounded second base when Gianfrido made the catch. But what surprised me more, on another side note, that was the first time the World Series was actually televised. So that's how they actually have that catch on film. But what really surprised me was when I learned years later that he never played another major league game. Gianfrido, he went to spring training and they cut him, and he didn't take that too well. Came up a few days short of getting a pension. He was only 25, so it wasn't like he was an old player, and so it just what do you think? A guy like that, he comes up, he makes this phenomenal catch of one of the all-time greats in the World Series of all places, and he just fades back into history. Fades back into his hometown. So that gave me the seed of an idea for a novel about World War II, when a number of ball players who made it to the majors simply because the stars were away in armed services, and so I sort of began to put together a novel on that, and I had a good draft, and as things work out, I worked a couple of years on it. In fact, I even interviewed a number of the players who were still alive. This goes back into the 1980s, and I was able to, through Sabre, and I was able to get the home phone numbers of a number of the old Nats who had played on the 44 team. And I chose 44 because it was that year that they finished way out of the money. They finished dead last, as you mentioned earlier, George. Between 43 and 45, they did fairly well. So right. I chose 44, and I began to research what happened day by day, game by game by game. And it turned out that it was quite a remarkable year. So I put together a novel, and I used as much as possible the actual quotes that were in the papers about the games, the players, and the manager, his assessment, and followed the season along through the very end. Well, I thought I had a pretty good product, and my son, who was working out in Hollywood for a film company, he said, "Let me take it to this producer. He's really a very well-known. I'd never heard of him, and I don't remember his name now. But he said, let me take it to him. I will let him see what it is." So he got a copy, and he gave it to the guy, or sent it to his office. And lo and behold, I'm in work one day, and I got a call right from the producer, and he said, "I loved it. I loved this story. Oh, the ending was so good." He said, "I'm going to send it to my people in New York." And well, whether he did or not, I'll never know. But so I waited a couple of months and didn't hear anything. So I finally screwed up my courage, and I called the office out there, and his secretary says, "Oh, well, wait, just let me check. Not him again, only one time." And she comes back and says, "Oh, he took a pass. We're not going to do anything." They didn't even call to let me know that they weren't going to do anything with him. But for a few weeks there, I was in high cotton, as Red Barber would say. Anyway, so over the years, believe it or not, I have massaged it, and I thought it was ready again, and I sent it off to a local publisher here in the D.C. area, Roman and Littlefield, who publish a lot of sports books. And I didn't do as much research as I guess I should have, and that turned out to be a lucky break for me, because when I sent the latest manuscript I had to the acquisitions editor, she came back to me and she said, "I really like it. It's very well written, and but we don't publish fiction here. We only do nonfiction books, but we have a large selection of sports books. Would you consider turning it into a book about baseball in Washington for the whole years of the war?" And I said, "Well, yeah, as things would happen, I had just been let go from the publishing company I'd been working for 6 years, along with several others, and I had nothing going. So I said, sure, that sounds terrific. So I met with her, and we discussed the book and how to go about doing it. And then I called my family friend Josh Drazen, who's an attorney up in the New Haven area, and a big sports fan, and he's an attorney. It's all you have to do is say attorney, and that means they are the big nitpickers of the world. Everything has to be written 6 times to make sure they didn't miss anything. So Josh agreed to help with the research and the proofing and checking out all the factual instances that are in the book. And I told him, I said, I didn't get an advance, so I'll give you full credit as a co-author. And he said, fine, because he'd always wanted to get into publishing too. So that was the genesis for the book. We used the 1944 season as sort of our jumping off point and expanded it. And lo and behold, I mean, it proved to me to be a wonderful experience simply because so few people knew anything about wartime baseball. They knew all the big stars had gone off to war, or some had, done work for the armed forces in the States, and others that actually fought in the war, including a number of the guys on the Senators or their real name, the Nationals, at the time, which is another sort of ironic link that they were officially the Washington Nationals, and we now have the Washington Nationals back in a whole different financial and legal setup. They have no relation to the original Washington Nationals that became the Senators officially in 1957. So the book, as we put it together, had some wonderful instances, because you mentioned George, that Washington finished second in 1945 and just missed winning the pennant. And the very reason, you can't make these things up, the reason they lost the pennant that year is because St. Louis was playing the Detroit Tigers for the final game of the season. And what happened was the Tigers' great first baseman came out of the Army and back into the war, back into the playing field, and he wound up. He came up in the ninth inning with the Tigers losing, and Clyde Suckworth, the manager of the Browns, put in a relief pitcher, and they walked the batter ahead of Sid. I forgot his name.
Hank Greenberg.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Hank Greenberg. They walked the batter to load the bases so that they could pitch to Hank Greenberg. Well, that's like walking the batter ahead of Mickey Mantle, or Greenberg promptly hit a grand slam home run to win the pennant for the Tigers, and and that's what kept Washington from winning the pennant that year. So the book is filled with little anecdotes and things like that happened. And I got such joy out of discovering these things. Perhaps the most enjoyable accidental discovery was because we included a lot of information about the war. You couldn't really write a book about Washington during the wartime without including aspects of the war. One of the more fascinating things, which to me just blew my mind, was discovering on April 12, 1945, when Roosevelt died, Clark Griffith, the owner of the Washington Ball Club, had been sending FDR a gold-plated pass so he could go to all the games that he wanted for free. And it was just a commemorative thing, because obviously the president could go to the ballpark when he wanted. But he had also sent one to Harry Truman, the vice president at the time, who had just become vice president. So anyway, Harry Truman, on White House stationery at the office of the vice president, had sent Clark Griffith a note thanking him for the pass and hoping that he could use it sometime soon. And this was typed. And then below his little signature, in his handwriting, he said, "Oh, well, now it looks like, things have changed." I'm paraphrasing, because what had happened between the time the letter was typed, which could have been a day or two earlier, who knows, FDR died, and there was Truman, now the President of the United States. But he had the decency to pen a handwritten note to Clark Griffith explaining why he wouldn't be able to come to the ballpark. Because he was now the president, and I found this in a collector's internet search for people who collect letters and autographs and things like that. And it was illustrated. It was right there, and the owner. I tried to get permission to use a photo of it in the book, and they wouldn't give me permission to use it. But it was so astounding because I've always admired Truman and FDR, and I even went to my volume of Truman, the great volume that was written by David McCulloch, and it's not in there. So that was another feather in my own cap that I put in there because nobody else seemed to notice it very much. But it was things like that made the writing of the book a great pleasure. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Well, David, let me just jump in here a minute. You bring up a couple of really interesting points, and that episode in 1945, which I had the personal experience in talking to my dad about it. The Washington players were sitting around the clubhouse at Griffith Stadium listening to the ball game on the radio.
Yeah.
And if Greenberg hadn't hit that grand slam home run, if the Tigers hadn't won, then Washington was going to get on a train and go to Detroit for a one-game playoff. And, my dad said how, distraught they all were because here they are, their bags are packed, they're ready to go. They got the game on the radio. All of a sudden, Greenberg gets up and hits that grand slam home run. The players said goodbye and went their merry way. And it was a very difficult thing for the players. And back then, today you have everything's instant. But knowing that here they are, the team itself sitting in the clubhouse at Griffith Stadium listening to the radio broadcast of that St. Louis-Detroit game.
Yeah. In fact, a couple of the players whom I interviewed mentioned that too, that they were sitting around there with their bags, at their feet, packed, ready to go.
Right. They were.
Yeah, David.
Yeah.
Didn't Washington finish their season a week earlier because Griffith had leased it to the Redskins?
Yes. Yeah, he released it to the Redskins because he was always in need of money, so he leased it to the Redskins and George Preston Marshall's Redskins. And,
well, they, David, you're right, and Alan, they did, and part of the justification was, well, first of all, the Redskins were a tenant. So, they were income stream for Clark Griffith, which he needed. But the Senators, as David had mentioned, in 44 finished dead last. And no one expected them in 45 to be in a pennant race. So, here's Clark Griffith, the owner. He's got an opportunity to, make some additional money. So he said, sure, Redskins take over Griffith Stadium. And the ball club finished the season a week early because the Redskins had taken over the stadium. So,
yeah, and he arranged for a lot of extra double headers to make the season.
Right, they did, David. As a matter of fact, I think I looked it up. I might have mentioned this on a previous podcast. In 1945, they played 44 double headers.
Wow.
which is an unbelievable number. In other words, half of their season was double headers. Yep. And, today in baseball, they don't even play doubleheaders except if there's a rain out or they have separate admissions on a day-night doubleheader. But during the war years, doubleheaders were scheduled by all teams, and especially, like I say, 44 doubleheaders in the regular season for Washington, which is an amazing number.
It's also a record that probably will never be broken.
No, are you kidding? That teams play one or two now. That's a big deal.
That's right. If it's a scheduled doubleheader. So and so you're right that's he leased it out to the Redskins, and I don't know what the Redskins did that year, but they were never really a good team up until like the 60s.
No, they were very good up until that time, and then they went into downward trend because in the late 40s and 50s, George Preston Marshall wouldn't allow any black players.
Oh yeah, well that lasted throughout his life.
Yeah.
In fact, he had it. He had a I read about he had in his will he had established a like a trust or for underprivileged kids to go to school, and it was written right in the they wouldn't just no black kids could qualify.
Yeah. But
Nice.
they got
David,
got Bobby Mitchell from the Browns.
Yeah.
And
that's we're way off the chub.
We're touching on a subject that David, I'd like you to talk a little bit about it with the Homestead Grays, because there's a situation. Your book revolves around both the Washington Nationals and the Homestead Grays. So why don't you talk a little bit about the Grays and the fact that, again, they were an income source, for Clark Griffith.
You're right.
One of the best teams of all time with Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell and Buck Leonard. I mean, they were sensational, but they were a tenant of Clark Griffith in Griffith Stadium. So, David, why don't you talk a little bit about the Grays?
Yeah, the Grays actually were from Pittsburgh, the Homestead area of Pittsburgh. And like most of the teams in the Negro Leagues, in the Eastern League and the Western League, they barnstormed during the week to make money. They only played the games, you might say, that counted pretty much on the weekend. But they had a tremendous following especially in southern cities, of course, and places like Chicago that had large African American populations. And yes, the Homestead Grays were one of and the Kansas City Monarchs were probably the two best teams in the Negro Leagues. And one of the reasons they did so well here, of course, was because there was, again, a large black population in D.C. that had grown because of the number of workers who came in for to work for the war effort. Lots of black workers came into town and into the surrounding areas, and they drew very well. They had all sorts of different difficulties with scheduling. They had problems. They didn't have problems bringing in the crowd, and in fact, one of the charges against Clark Griffith was that he was a racist and that he wouldn't allow the black players on the team. And we've talked about this in the past, that it was an economics issue. He was not against segregation as segregation. He was against segregation between the black and the major leagues, simply because he knew it would kill the Negro Leagues, and the Negro Leagues were supplying, again, a good portion of his rental income. So there were during the war. There were a couple of exhibition games played between a white all-star team and a black all-star team. I think they played about 2 or 3 games until the commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landers, put a stop to it, and he didn't like the idea of them even competing against one another, even though they were for charity and raised money for charity. But the Grays won a good number of Negro League championships, and they did very well for Washington, and they loved playing here because of the amenities that were here that were not in a lot of other towns, particularly towns like Kansas City or St. Louis, places where there was really deep segregation. There was segregation in Washington, of course, but the facilities here for African Americans were of a much more advanced stage. They had good theaters, they had fine restaurants, and Griffith himself didn't really segregate Griffith Stadium. He had set up I don't know what you would call it, but he set up a separate section which was for black fans. And I think if you were white and you wanted to sit there, I don't think anyone would have said anything. It wasn't like reverse discrimination. You couldn't sit in the black section. And he had a very good working relationship with the black community. in town, which didn't hold when he died, and his nephew took over the team. His nephew was a racist, and that's why the team. One of the main reasons why the team moved to Minneapolis. He was not shy about expressing his sentiments about the black community in Washington particularly, but in any area. So the Grays were really a great team, and Josh Gibson was haunted by all sorts of ghosts and devils, and he died quite young. And so, the funny thing is, like I said earlier, what surprised me about the Algie and Frida, he was only 25 when his career ended. So, and it wasn't because of any kind of drinking problem or anything. They just refused to. They were getting Duke Snyder up and plays like that. But so anyway, going back to the Homestead Grays, they've done a lot of research. There's a great African American sports museum out in Kansas City that covers the history of the Kansas City Monarchs and the rest of the Negro Leagues. And they're beginning to put together better statistics. If you read any of the, as I did, you read any of the black publications like the African American or the Pittsburgh, I forget the name of the Pittsburgh paper. But anyway, the statistics were very, very sketchy. They might have the box score in for a game. They might not have the box score in for the next 2 or 3 games. You couldn't tell quite often between the games that were played for real that counted in the statistics and the exhibition games. And then, of course, they had the games that they barnstormed with. So the stats were very, very hard to distinguish the actual stats from the sort of pickup games.
Well, David, thank you for talking about the Nats and the Grays, and I wanted to compliment you, and I hope that Kansas City, the Negro League Museum, they have a copy of your book, and that fans, baseball people that are interested in World War II era baseball would pick up a copy because it's very well done.
Yes, thank you. And all you have to any bookstore can order. It can be ordered from any bookstore. Barnes and Noble has it. I don't think they're on the shelf at this point, but it's certainly it's available in hardcover and in soft cover now. The soft cover came out the year to commemorate Jackie Robinson entering Major League Baseball. It's got a banner across the top.
Yeah, David and George. Yeah, David and George. There's a book that came out 2 years ago called Electric October, which is a game-by-game history of the 1947 World Series, and they get into the obscure players pretty deeply, and 3 of them were Gianfrido, Cookie Lavagetto, and Bill Bevins, who none of them play a game after that in the major leagues after that series.
Well, that's amazing, Alan. I didn't realize that. I certainly knew about Gianfrido, but I didn't realize about Bevins and Lavagetto.
I got that from that book, and they also went heavily into George Sternweiss, who was killed at the age of 40 when a New Jersey Transit train.
Right.
His
nickname was Snuffy.
Over the bridge, the bridge there.
Right. His nickname was Snuffy. He and my dad were very friendly. Snuffy Sternweiss won the stolen base title in 44 and 45. My dad was second both years, and Snuffy and my dad were very good friends. And I remember when that happened, my father was really upset because it was such a horrible accident. I mean, here it is. It's an open bridge or something there.
There's a bridge.
And he went right into the river and drowned.
That they couldn't. And he wasn't the only one. There were a whole bunch of people that get killed.
Right. Right.
And that. Also, I just wanted to ask you a question, Georgia. Your dad know Eddie Yost?
Yes. Yeah, Eddie Yost and my dad were
like 18 years old when he came to Washington because of the war, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, he was the one I interviewed,
yeah.
thinking that he would remember the most. And of course, he had a very long career in the major leagues. And he said, "Oh, I can't remember that far back."
Oh, wow.
He had some anecdotes, but he couldn't. And I thought, well, it's his rookie year. You'd think he'd remember his rookie year, but no, he couldn't remember too much. Of course, he was an old man by then. And
that's interesting. And Alan and David, you mentioned Eddie Yost, and Eddie and my dad were very good friends. As a matter of fact, I met Eddie Yost at a Washington Senators reunion, and we had a nice visit. But yeah, Eddie's rookie year was 44, and I have a signed baseball, 47 signed baseball. Which was my dad's last year playing at Washington, and Eddie Yost, his name is on there. So, they called Eddie Yost the walking man. He had a great eye, and his penchant was really walking, working the count and getting the base on ball. So, Eddie was a very good player, long time. But as David mentioned, 44, that was his rookie year. And it might have just been a big blur. Who knows? Because the game hadn't slowed down for him yet. So maybe he was going too fast. And of course, he didn't play much in 44.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. He led the American League in on-base percentage twice.
Right. Yep.
Even though he was basically a 250, 260 hitter because of
he was on base a lot, right? Because he did walk. So. All right. Well, David, thank you again for that, synopsis about the Nats and the Grays.
Thank you, David.
It was great.
Yep. Okay.
And I wanted to turn it over now to Hal. You've been quiet, but you've got a very interesting topic with regard to Willard Mullen and the book you've written. So, Hal, why don't you step in here and talk a little bit about the great sports cartoonist Willard Mullen?
Well, when I was a kid, I read newspapers every day. I read 2 and 3 newspapers every day, usually back to front. And one of the papers I read was the World Telegram and Sun. And Willard Mullen was the sports cartoonist. And every day he would deliver an outstanding cartoon, caricatures, brilliant stuff. And I loved it. And I was fortunate enough in my life, in my career, to get a job as a kid. I was a teenager at NYU, and I got a part-time job working at the World Telegram and Sun. And there in the corner of the sports department was an easel, and that was where Willard Mullen worked. And I was just blown away by the fact that I was working on the same newspaper as this guy who just did brilliant caricatures. Mullen had a whimsical sense of humor, and so his cartoons reflected that. He was like Leonardo da Vinci of sports cartoonists, and in fact, his contemporaries voted him the sports cartoonist of the century, the 20th century, not the 21st. The book that we did is called Willard Mullen's Golden Age of Baseball Drawings. And it covers the period from 1934 to 1972. Mullen retired, and the work that he did lives on. It's just remarkable. His most famous creation is the Brooklyn Bum. Now, how did that come about? Why are the Dodgers called the Bums? Well, he had gone to Ebbets Field with nothing particular in mind, just looking for an idea. Come up with something, And it was a doubleheader, and the Dodgers had lost the first game. And it was about the 5th inning of the second game, and he said, well, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go somewhere else, go back to the newspaper, I guess. And he called a cab. He hailed a cab, and he gets in the cab at Ebbets Field, and the cabbie says to him, how'd our bums do today? And it lit a light over his head. My God, that was a beautiful idea. Let me go draw a bum. And so he did that. He created the Brooklyn Bum. The Brooklyn Bum was a special character. He was downtrodden because, after all, he was a bum, but he was very proud. He was very independent. Mullen created him as unshaven, with the stump of a cigar stuck in his mouth. He planted a worn hat on him and gave him a tattered coat and pants. The only parts that matched were the plaid patches that adorned each of his elbows and knees. The bum was always cobbler challenged, one shoe held together by a neatly tied bandana, the other with a hole in the sole. Well, I mean, you couldn't not fall in love with the Brooklyn bum. And he became the image of the Dodgers. But he was not the only character that Mullen created. For the Giants, he created Willie the Giant. He was an oversized, bulbous character who was always fighting with the bum in Mullen's cartoons, because, after all, it was a great rivalry here in New York between the Giants and the Dodgers. For the Cardinals, I know that the Cardinals have that beautiful logo with a bird sitting on a bat, and I just think it's probably one of the best logos in baseball. Mullen decided that since they played in St. Louis on the banks of the Mississippi River, that he would create a riverboat gambler to represent the Cardinals, the St. Louis Swifty, who had a handlebar mustache, and he wore tails, and he was always had a stack of cards ready to play poker and take your money. For the Phillies, remember, in 1950 were the Whiz Kids, a very young team. For the Phillies, he drew a juvenile delinquent with a slingshot in his back pocket. Stuff like that just came to Mullen. He just came out of his brain, When the Mets were born, he used his grandson's name was Ted, as a model for the baby Met, who was the logo of the Mets in the early years. And he had a lot of fun with that. So Mullen had a very great insight into what made people laugh, what made people remember his characters, and he drew them on a daily basis, 5 days a week. Remarkable. So I decided, I was taken by Mullen, as you can tell from what I've been saying, and I decided that since he had been retired and later passed away, that we should bring Mullen's cartoons to a new generation and let them see what a great cartoonist he was. And so I approached the family, and they agreed that I could do this, and we put together this book. It's a hardcover book. It's available from Amazon, and it's chock full of Willard Mullen's baseball cartoons. Some of them are just brilliant, if I have to say so myself. I didn't draw them, so I can say that. They're just fabulous images of the time he was covering baseball. And they're not all cartoon or caricatures. There are a lot of them in there that are actual, portraits. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Pen and ink portraits.
And he was such a remarkable guy. His name was Willard Mullen. It's a lot of different letters. He would sign his drawings, his name at the bottom of the drawing, and he would do it with 26 pen strokes. All but 2 of them were horizontal. Not an easy thing to do, but Mullen did it. And he delighted in doing stuff like that. When Lou Gehrig retired, and he had that famous speech at Yankee Stadium, Mullen not only drew a portrait of Gehrig, but he also wrote a poem, a very moving poem, about Gehrig, because everybody knew that Gehrig was terminally ill. And, it was stuff like this that he did that set him apart. He also had a lot of the cartoonists of that day, of his day, were fans of his. And he was very free with his time. And his wisdom, he would talk to them and tell them what he thought of their work. And so they were very liberal with their memories of Mullen. The introduction to the book is written by the late Bill Gallo, who was a great sports cartoonist here in New York for the Daily News. And Gallo had his own set of characters, but in my mind, they didn't match what Mullen had.
No, you're 100% right.
So,
I would see the two. I was just going to say, I would see the two every day because my father would bring home the Daily News and the World Telegram and Sun, and Gallo looked like, to me, and because I was a up-and-coming cartoonist, Gallo was a rank amateur compared to what Mullen did. That's my own personal opinion.
Well, Mullen's cartoons hung, I'm not sure they still do, but they hung in some very important places like the Metropolitan Museum here in New York, Metropolitan Museum of Art, the National Art Museum of Sport in Indianapolis. They hung in the Smithsonian in Washington, and of course in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. So people knew about Mullen and his work, and he was very humble about the whole thing. He would give away the cartoons, and because I was 18 years old at the time, and I had no idea what was going on. I was afraid of my own shadow. I was thrilled to be in the newsroom of this major New York daily newspaper. I wasn't smart enough to ask him for a cartoon. I wish I had. But he gave them away. It was no big deal to him, and he just a remarkable character. He would sit there.
Hey, Hal, let me ask you something because I really am interested. I think, obviously he was legendary. But did the sports cartoonists, just like sports writers, were part of what they did also picked up by like the sporting news? I've seen cartoons and front page. Okay. But how did that work? Did he do it specifically for the sporting news, or did they take it from one of his cartoons locally?
He would do cartoons specifically for other publications, but he worked. His daily job was the New York World Telegram and Sun. Right. And in fact, his first he was recruited by the sports editor, a man named Joe Williams, who brought him to New York, and his first job was to go cover a press conference involving Babe Ruth. I think it may have been Ruth's departure from the Yankees in the 30s. And he drew the cartoon, and it appeared in the newspaper the next day. And the executive editor of the paper, who was a bear of a man named Lee B. Wood, scared the daylights out of me when I saw him marching through that newsroom. Lee Wood thought the cartoon was terrible. And he told Mullen that. And now Mullen thought, well, my tenure here is not going to last very long. But Joe Williams believed in him and encouraged him. And Mullen very quickly turned it around. And as I said, he invented these characters in baseball. But he also drew other sports. He didn't only draw baseball. He was very interested in track and field. He was very interested in college football. Pro football in those days was, don't forget, in the beginning of its development. So, and boxing, he was very big in boxing. And all of those cartoons were just images that would strike you. And for me, they took my breath away. I was just fascinated by his ability to do that. I only got to see him work a few times because he did his work in a studio at home here on Long Island. And what he would do is draw the cartoon and take it to the railroad station, give it to the conductor on the railroad, on the Long Island Railroad, and it would be delivered to Penn Station. And I would pick it up from the conductor. And he would give the conductor $5 or $10, whatever he gave him. And the conductor would hand off the cartoon to me, and I would take it to the newsroom at Barclay Street. So it was like a pass off. But I saw him. He did come into the office occasionally, and he would sit in the corner of the sports department, looking out the window, and he would curl his feet around a high stool, and away he would go. It didn't take him long. He did not. It wasn't like 3 hours or 4 hours. He would whip out one of these cartoons, within an hour or so.
Wow.
I was just struck by it.
He did the covers of the last 7 Brooklyn Dodger yearbooks, which I have.
Well, he also did the Met yearbooks, the first couple.
Yeah, he did a couple of Giants ones also when they were here.
Yeah, he was much in demand because of his ability and his talent, and I can understand why. So he was just he was one of a kind, frankly. There were other cartoonists. Gallo certainly was a great cartoonist, and there were others, Burris Jenkins, and at the AP we had Tom Paprocki, Ray Paprocki's father. Well, no, maybe his grandfather. But
I didn't know that. He was.
You didn't know? He would sign his cartoons Pap instead of Paprocki, but they were related. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether his father or grandfather. But they were all very good cartoonists. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But Mullen was one of a kind. Mullen had the ability to capture the image and relay it to the reader so distinctly and so perfectly. It just, you couldn't miss it. I have a framed portrait of the third game of the 1951 World playoff, the Bobby Thompson home run. And Mullen did that on deadline because that game ended at 4:00 in the afternoon. But I have a framed front page from the World Telegram and Sun of that cartoon. So he was able to do. He wasn't one of these guys who mulled over his work. He just did it. He sat down, took the pen and ink, and went to work. And he was just a remarkable guy and a whimsical guy, funny guy. Had a great sense of humor.
Now, how were those cartoons? Would they be included in a particular story, or were they like a freestanding cartoon?
No, freestanding. They were freestanding.
Right.
He had a place in the paper where his cartoon would appear every day. It was on the front page of the sports section, and you knew where it was going to be every day.
Right.
And I looked forward to it. It was one of the first things I would look for because, it was such he struck a nerve with you every day, and it was just so perfect. His drawings really hit a home run every day as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, I would agree.
And his portraits were really terrific. He had a portrait of in 1930, I want to say 37, maybe 36, maybe 38. In the teeth of the Depression, Joe DiMaggio held out, and Mullen drew a cartoon of a guy sitting on a bench reading the paper, and it says DiMaggio holds out for 10,000 or whatever the number was. And this poor guy, was clearly down and out, had no job, had no income, and here was this baseball player looking for all this money. And boy, that's thank goodness we got that cartoon, and it's in the book. Talk about poignant. He knew how to strike a chord with his readers, and he did it on a daily basis.
Hal, just so everybody would know, what is the name of your book about Willard Mullen?
The name is Willard Mullen's Golden Age of Baseball Drawings, 1934 to 1972. I wanted, as I said, this book came out many years after he had passed away, but I just felt that his cartoons should be available and seen by a new generation of readers, and that's why we did the book.
Well, I think it's wonderful, and sports cartoonists. I mean, today you got a lot of political cartoonists, but sports cartoonists have a special niche, and certainly, as you've explained, Willard Mullen was probably the greatest. So, I really think it's wonderful that you had published that book. And did you have to get permission from the family to use all those cards, or how did that work? Did they have copyrights?
Yes, what I did was I contacted the lawyer who represents the Mullen family, And he was a terrific guy, and he's the guy who gathered the cartoons. He went all over the place. The cartoons are everywhere. Many of them are at Syracuse University. With my money, and my son went to Syracuse University. And he contributed. Mullen contributed much of his work to Syracuse University. And my co-author, the lawyer who represented the family, collected many of the cartoons. He did a lot of the legwork. I did the writing, and he did the assembling of the cartoons. There were some that I wanted, specific cartoons that I wanted in the book, like the one I just described about the Depression, and he got them. And we had his daughter, Shirley Mullen, did an introduction talking about growing up with this great cartoonist as a father. And, of course, we had Gallo do an introduction. And away we went. It was a lot of fun. It was a great ride for me because I loved that era. I loved the era of the time that he worked. Much better than today's baseball, where we have sign stealing and all kinds of funny stuff going on. But,
and you guys were instrumental in helping me with the Nats and the Grays in the section with the photos, because I wanted to include at least one Willard Mullen cartoon in the book, and you guys were just great in helping me out with that.
Which one did you put in? I know I gave you permission. We gave you permission.
Yeah, it's the one is the 44 World Series. Is it 44? Yeah, with Eddie Stanky, the two best shortstops in baseball. He did a cartoon, not a cartoon so much as a pen and ink drawing of the two best shortstops going head-to-head in the World Series.
Vern Stevenson, Marty Marion.
And Marty Marion, yes.
Yeah.
You're right.
He did a lot of pen and ink work. I mean, his cartoons were cartoons, but he also, as I said earlier, he was a great portrait artist. He could draw portraits that were really terrific. They're in the book as well. And he was a very talented man, simple as that, with a whimsical sense of humor, not taking himself that seriously, and it carried over into his work. So I was privileged to be able to do this book and to present his work to a new generation of readers, and hopefully they enjoy it as much as I did.
All right, guys. Hey, Hal, thank you very much, and David, thank you. Both of you have wonderful books, and I know for me it's an education listening to both of you and Alan with your knowledge. So, maybe we can talk a little, another time about, baseball history, vintage sports. And certainly Willard Mullen and David, you're talking about the Nats and the Grays is a wonderful part of that. So I really appreciate it, guys, and I'm looking forward to getting together with us again. And we'll say goodnight.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.